Hey everybody, this is Chris Adams with Body Slam the Competition, and you're listening to us weekly here on Worldwide Podcasting Radio Network. Don't miss us.
Hi, this is Pamela Michelle, co host of Bets Like a Girl and That Dating Show with SportsX Michelle, and you're listening to Worldwide Podcasting Radio Network.
This is a Worldwide Podcasting Radio Network syndicated show.
This call is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody. It's Michelle, and I'm live with my co-host, Pamela Michelle. We are pre-recording Bets Like a Girl so that we get it up in time for you to have betting tips should you choose to take advice from women. Not everybody does. Good morning, Pam.
Good morning.
I am just waking up, and I have a gaming day in front of me. I thought I had the betting sheets that I picked up yesterday when I went to the sports book because I actually placed a bet. I put my money where my mouth was yesterday, and I'm just looking for them. So I think I have them. But we always go to VegasInsider.com to get some odds. So I'm just waking up. So this is a show we do on VOC Nation, and now I understand it's simulcast other places, which is so totally cool. We take a half hour and we review the Vegas lines that are out there, or we're pretty much Vegas because I'm in Vegas now. So we look at the lines in the sportsbook in Vegas, and Pam's got the take on fantasy sports. Pam, I have to tell you, I was out the other night and I was asked if I was an expert in fantasy sports and would I be on standby for someone's fantasy sport. Oh, I do have the lines. Oh, yay. So I was asked if I would be on standby while somebody did their fantasy sports draft for football, and I said, absolutely not. I am so not an expert. I said, in fact, I was the lame person. I'm always the person, like when somebody wants to finish up their league and they need an extra person, then they're just like, hey, Michelle, do you want to join our fantasy league? So I will join, and then I will, say like, okay, sure, no problem. But you are the fantasy expert that I would, if I were serious about fantasy sports and I wanted to draft a really good team, I would have you on standby, and I would pay top dollars. So I do think this should be a profession for you. Have you ever had somebody ask you that before, if you would be on standby during their fantasy football draft?
Not officially. I've sort of been unofficially on standby for people where, like, I know that they're drafting and then they'll shoot me a text and be like, it's the 5th round, who should I take? And it's like, okay, well, what does your roster look like now? Like, who's left? Like, then I'll throw out a couple names. Once I know what the roster that you already have kind of looks like, I'll throw out a few names and see if they're still available. But I've never been officially on standby. It's just more when people start to panic and they're like, oh my God, well, let me see what Pamela might do.
Well, I think this year we're going to use at your draft source as an official draft source for fantasy sports. And I know we go over to Fighting Chance Fantasies website a lot. So we'll try to put some fantasy information in. If you want help with your fantasy team this year, be sure to follow Pamela on Twitter at Sporty Diva. She's consulted people and participated in some of the against one of the former winners of the SiriusXM fantasy football charity. I want to say showdown or whatever they call it. I forget what they call it, but it's like every year SiriusXM, at least they did do a big fantasy sports okay. Like, it's too early for these noises. They did a fantasy sports league, and the money would go to charity. And I know Pam last year, she was on top in the SportsX Radio Fantasy League and some other leagues as well. She's won some real money, so be sure to follow her. Okay, so I did not win yesterday. I took the over with my
did not.
Race 8. No, but I was actually on air out here, and Ken said it was a bad beat that I should have won. I will tell you, I wouldn't have changed my thought. It was a 7.5 total, and the Tigers were playing Cleveland. It was pretty sure the game was in Detroit. And the way I looked at it, I knew Verlander was pitching, and I know a lot of people will pay attention to, and the experts will tell you to pay attention to the pitchers. And one of the things the guy at the sports book said to me when I took the over in the game, he said it's Verlander against, and whoever was pitching for the Cleveland Indians. And that's one of the things that I know you do in fantasy baseball as well. You look at the pitchers and the pitching duel. So tell me your thoughts, like if you're going to, when I say bet on baseball, and we do, a lot of people, fantasy sports isn't betting technically, legally. Other people out here anyway, they call it fantasy sports wagering. So depending on your school of thought, we're going to lump fantasy sport and betting into the same podcast. Pam's a fantasy sports expert, and I'm out in Vegas hanging with some of the top handicappers and holding my own, actually, doing things my way. So when you do fantasy baseball, Pam, what are your thoughts on choosing a pitcher, looking at the pitchers? How closely do you look at the pitchers when it comes to your fantasy baseball team?
I always look at pitchers when it comes to that, just because even if you're going to bet the line and you see what the total number is, there are certain pitchers that are prone to not pitch very well in certain places. There's a few things that come into play, but I mean, right now, if I was looking at Chris Sale, he's not giving up a whole lot of runs. His ERA is ridiculously good. So it would be more shocking if he gave up 6 runs as opposed to just the couple that he's been giving up in a game. So everybody's due for a bad day, but for the most part, looking at how their performance has been and what they've been trending as far as how many earned runs have been let up. But you also can't be tricked by that, because sometimes the earned run for a starting pitcher may not necessarily be their complete earned run set, because if they exit in the 6th inning and they leave a couple of guys on base, even though they get charged for them, it could be their bullpen that is tacking those runs on because they're not able to get the out.
There's a lot of information on Twitter, and we tend to rely on Twitter a lot. I know we've done I have independently built a social media business, and you are so supportive and help me so much with everything I'm doing with SXM Media. There's a great Twitter handle called @TheThread, and The Thread is a world leader in publication and distribution of sports betting information. And I don't know how active they are when they tweet. Sometimes people put up Twitter addresses, and their last tweet was a year ago. But this particular account, their last tweet was an hour ago, and they put up something for the NBA Finals. There is an article out on Twitter. If you Google how to bet MLB baseball, and betting is explained. And I'm going to tweet that so that you can look and see, and we can learn, because we talked last week about moneyline wagering. We talked about the different spreads. So I will put that. You can go to @SportsXMichelle, and then if you listen to SportsX Radio, and if you continue to listen to our show, we will bring you some of the best hit from those who do make a living. There are people out there that make a living.
Oh yeah, there are people who make a living doing this. Like, this is literally their only job. They get up, they look at the sheet, and they figure out exactly where they're going to place their money and see how, while they're going to do. There are people who definitely, make a living doing this.
Great. And so Gaming Today is one of the publications that I look at, that I actually write for. And I've been talking about, betting on baseball. And, so yesterday I decided, I said, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I went to one of the station's casinos out here, and the spread was 7.5. So that was, for me, a game that I'm comfortable taking the over. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to see a 3-2 game. And I understand that. I'm not saying to bet a lot of money either. Like right now, I'm going to be very honest. When it comes to the whole thing with betting, you have to make sure that if you're going to bet and you're going to bet seriously, you want to educate yourself. And that's what we're doing. We're looking at the run line. We're looking at different things, but trying to understand it before you turn around down and go say, you know what, I'm going to go, throw all my money down, which I would never recommend. So yesterday I went to the sportsbook. I looked at the line. It was 7.5. And I said, you know what, with my rule, and I've been pretty successful with a line of 8 when the Tigers are playing, I'm going to go with the over. More often than not, I'm going to win. But what I want to understand now is, okay, what do the other people that bet on baseball use when they make their decision? I bet like a girl. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with my intuitive guide.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to look at everything. Tigers are playing against Cleveland. And my thing is, the Tigers are my team. They manage to screw it up more often than not when they're playing against the Indians. That's in my mind. I'm not going to look at all the stats. And I'm not going to, but there are people out there like Mark
And
Lawrence.
the thing is, not to cut you off or anything, but the thing is, I mean, it's a huge belief too. Obviously, you're a Tigers fan. I'm a Red Sox fan. Nobody really knows your team better than you either. When you're watching it all season, you know what happened last season. It's easier almost to kind of bet on your team because you know the tendencies of who they play bad against. So the whole no one knows your team better than you theory definitely comes into play, I think.
I think that's true, and I think that we saw that with one of the fantasy sports sites, and that was their tagline. That they believe that if you know your own team, a lot of people will tell you, again, fantasy sports. We want to just say, technically it's not considered betting, and so we're not necessarily. It's just I think you do have a similar audience. I think a lot of people that are interested in fantasy sports are also a sports betting audience, and you do have people that are sports fans. I mean, a lot of people not, but for the most part, I think most people I talk to have started. They have an avid, there's an affinity for a certain team, and for me, like you said, the Red Sox are your team. The Tigers are my team. I'm going to follow them, and I'm going to predict how they're doing. Some people will tell you, don't ever bet on your team. Never bet on your team. The way I look at it is I love baseball. I love watching the game. I can watch the game. I've had friends compare watching baseball to watching paint dry, and I just think, well, okay, then I'll sit and watch paint dry.
I've heard that from a few people. I've also heard people say it's not baseball season till after the All-Star game for them, because that's when it picks up. How the team shaped up already. To them, it's more exciting.
I get it, and for me, that's the NBA. The NBA is not exciting until the playoff for me, and even Stanley Cup. I mean, I love
that's what we talked about last night. Yeah.
Right, and
we talked about that.
A hockey game. Did you on the show?
I love hockey.
What did you talk about last night on Sports?
I was never a big hockey fan.
What's that?
I said I was never a big hockey fan until I actually went to a game. And once I went to a game, I was hooked. Like, I had the biggest appreciation for it, and it's so different live than on TV. And now I am definitely more apt to watch a hockey game. But before I actually went to a game, to me, I think I might have watched paint dry.
Let me ask you a question, Pam. How are we with time?
We are about 17 minutes.
Okay, 17 left?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got 17 minutes left. And Pam's talking about hockey and how she became a hockey fan after going to see a game live. I know last night on SportsX Radio, Alex talked about hockey, and he has, if you go over to SportsX Radio on Twitter, you'll find all the tweets from last night's show. You'll also find information on Michelle McPhee's book that, so a lot of what we do, Pam was the one who introduced me to Michelle McPhee, who has written a book and talks a lot on her Twitter handle about what's going on with Aaron Hernandez. So you're going to get a lot of information from Twitter. Be sure to follow Pamela at Sporty Diva, and she does a show with Thomas Murphy, Sports Infusion. So she's got a ton of sports information, and SportsX Radio on Twitter. If you listen to their show, it's free. You'll get a lot of betting information from the experts. Last night, Alex Smith did talk about hockey, and Ken takes great pride in the hockey handicappers. He's got Cam Gore on and also Alex B. Smith. I agree with you with regard to hockey being an amazing sport to witness in person, to appreciate in person. I remember when the hockey strike was going on, and I was walking through Madison Square Garden because I was there for bull riding. It was just so weird. I mean, it was so weird because you could almost hear chants, where it's "Let's go Rangers," only it's like "Let's go Rangers," and you couldn't hear it. Do you know what what I mean? Like, it was the hockey strike was going on, and there were so many people on Twitter where I realized, like, wow, there are some diehard hockey fans out there that are missing their sport, that crave hockey. And I've actually been to Stanley Cup playoffs. I think Stanley Cup playoffs are one of the most emotionally charged playoffs when it comes to a playoff series. I just think it's amazing. I do know that hockey, from a betting perspective, is something I'm not necessarily comfortable with, although, again, I'm going to go with over-under, like whether there'll be 5 goals scored, whether there'll be 3 goals scored. My philosophy is this: if you're a sports fan, you want to watch, for me, and you want to watch the game and you want to watch your team, like I can watch any team play baseball. So if I pick an over in a baseball game, for example, the Angels are playing against Seattle today and the opening line was 7.5. That half point killed me yesterday because the total was 7.
Yeah.
So, but I still can see there are such high scores in baseball, the way I see it lately. There are such high scores that I see 7.5 as a reasonable number for a game to go. Either one team will score a lot, or it can be a close game. 4-3 is not an unreasonable score. 5-3 can happen. I don't know, but what should you pay attention to in today's game against the Red Sox, right? We're talking Baltimore is in Boston. There's been a lot of controversy going on right there because of what happened with Adam Jones, which we can take a minute to talk about. The opening line was 8.5. The total's up to 9. So you've got 9 as the predicted total with Baltimore and Boston. Pam, what are your thoughts when the total's at 9 in this particular game, which takes place at 7:10 tonight Eastern? That's an Eastern Standard Time.
Right. I actually haven't looked at who the pitchers are. It's
I will
the
tell
first
you
place
the
I
pitchers. Okay, well the pitchers. Okay, for Baltimore you have Kevin Gausman, and for Boston you have Drew Pomeranz.
See, I almost would with that pitching, I almost would take the over 9 on that.
Okay, so that's an almost would take the over 9. So if you're going to have an almost.
I would almost. I'm not very confident in that, only because Pomeranz's performance hasn't been consistent, and
so
I know it's not an exact.
I'm sorry. So would you feel more comfortable picking a winner?
I would feel more comfortable picking the winner. Yeah, I would. I want to say that the Red Sox are going to take it.
Okay. So, and that's the thing, just because I wouldn't feel comfortable taking the over 9 in that game. I wouldn't, when I say an almost over, that means stay away. So if you're going to stay away from the total in that game, because somebody who's an avid Red Sox fan who pays attention to, who's living there right in the heart of the New England area and pays attention to the local sports there, she's looking at it saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable with that 9 total. So don't bet the over. If anything, take Boston, to win the game. And then you can also look at the information as far as how to bet on baseball and see if there are other ways to go, whether you parlay, whether you pick another team. And we'll get into that as this show continues. But so the pick today, and by the way, we can touch also, Pam, on your NFL draft picks last week. I think you did pretty well.
I actually did do fairly well. I was not surprised because, you never can truly predict the NFL draft. It was surprising to see some of the moves that a few teams made, but I liked the flow of the draft this year. It was a little more exciting than I think people thought it was going to be. But I did well on my picks.
Yeah, I watched the draft. Steiner's had an NFL draft party, and there was, I watched with knowing that you had taken the under with the Alabama players, the over with the SEC players. Those were 2 picks that you were right on the money. It was the first year that you could bet on the NFL draft. There were prop bets that were out and about, throughout Vegas, and a lot of people paying attention to that. I find the draft exciting. I like watching the college players make it, and there was a little bit of controversy. There usually is. One of the things, a couple things. We have some time left, and I'm going to ask you. We'll say the pick for today's show. Pam's going to go with Boston, and I'll tweet out her pick, and I will tweet something out. I'm looking at the Mets in Atlanta, and I have to look at the pitchers because you've got Bartolo Colon is actually pitching for Atlanta. Atlanta. So that's a little bit different. Then it'll be interesting to see. He's going to be pitching against his former teammates and how that plays out. And then Jacob deGrom is on the mound. The Mets have not been doing very well, and the total there is 8. So that's a game, again, for me, because I would love to see the Mets win. That might be a game that I would look at the over, but I will do some homework before I say that I'm comfortable with that. You think, Pam, when a pitcher goes against his former team, that there's an advantage there?
I think it can be. I think it also can be more of an advantage for the hitter going against a guy who they used to see consistently pitch, know what his weaknesses are. They know what his habit is, how he likes to throw. I don't necessarily think it's a huge advantage for the pitcher other than the fact he's going to get geared up. Obviously, he knows the hitter's tendencies as well, but I think it boils down to who's paid more attention. Did the hitter pay more attention when that pitcher was throwing, or was the pitcher constantly doing their homework, knowing how their lineup was faring? So I think it can be advantage on both sides, So I think it comes down to paid attention.
I think that's a good point. Not only does the pitcher know the players that are coming up to bat, but the batters know the pitcher who's on the mound. So they may know weaknesses there, or they may have an inside scoop on that. So whether or not you're going to weigh too heavily into that also sets pitches out. So that's something that you want to pay attention to. Again, for me, it's a total emotional attachment to the game. I'm going to look for a game that I love that baseball is never over till it's over. You can be watching the game and it can be the 8th inning and you're sitting there and the score is whatever it is. I mean, I think last Sunday the Mets were behind 20-something to 4, and it was, the 7th inning. It's just like, okay. And by the time it was the 9th inning, it's like, oh, they only need 23 runs, So they scored 23 runs. It was like, are they going to score 23 runs in the top of the 9th? It's unlikely, but
it's possible. It's possible. And I think that's the great thing that people overlook about baseball is that even a significant amount that you think is just not able to happen. I mean, there was one Red Sox game and it gets played on NESN as a classic, and it was the Mother's Day Miracle. And the Sox were down by 8, and then they ended up in the last inning scoring 9 runs to come back. And with baseball, it's so different than any other sport as far as what you can do and what's going to happen. I mean, you don't know if your team's going to be capable of scoring the 10 runs, but you have those last opportunities to do so. And it's almost like with football, it's so different. If you're down by 14 with 2 minutes left, it's not insurmountable. Timeouts, there's so many things that you can do to kill the clock. And with baseball, it's just not that way. You get your opportunities until those outs are made.
No, I agree. We're going to just take a real quick time check. We don't have commercials during the half-hour show, but we're at what time?
We're at about 4.5.
Okay, so we've got 4.5
We're
minutes.
at the 4-minute
I've got a couple books that I would recommend. There's one book, Beat Sports book. It's an insider's guide to betting the NFL by Dan Gordon. So if you're going, we'll get into football as football season as we get closer to football, but it's baseball season, and so another book that will help you with regard to all the different sports, but they actually have a dedicated chapter to baseball, and it's Len Banker's book of sports betting, which I picked up at the Gamblers Bookstore here in Vegas. So we'll go through this chapter 5. Baseball has a long season, 6.5 months, and it claims more casualties among bettors than any other sports. Now it's interesting because I had heard people say that baseball is the one sport you can beat the books on. So we'll see how we do. Today, I will look closer at that Tigers game. I'm apt to still stick with my over, even though the total is 8. Once it gets above 8, I start to be a little bit more leery, but 8 seems like a reasonable number. Pam's going to stay away from the total in the Boston game. You will hear us talk about Boston and Detroit probably more than any other team. Baltimore is playing Boston. Pam, Adam Jones was trending yesterday. We talked about it last night. And I've been, when I graduated and I walked around Boston University, I walked around, there were a lot of interracial couples. I did not ever feel or sense, but I'm not a person of color, and I'm not going to feel the same way as someone, people were saying Boston is one of the most racist cities. Your thoughts on that? Do you feel that? You're there, you've got close ties to Boston. Your thoughts on what happened yesterday at Fenway?
Well, the thing is, it's like the situation that happened, I think it was it's like 2 minutes isn't enough for this, just because I have a different take on why so many people were wanting proof in the social media era, where they're like, well, where's the proof of this? And I think it comes on the heels of some comments that were made by ESPN's Bramani Jones and Jamel Hill, where they put Boston basically under this microscopic glass, saying it's a racist city. I've lived here my whole life. I actually find that it's very mixed. I find it's very accepting. And the sad part is I don't feel that it is a racist city. I am not a person of color, so I can't say how people of color view it. I know how I see it. I have many different kinds of friends from many different backgrounds, and I've always been taught to treat people as people, not based on what they look like. And so that's how I view things. I can't speak for somebody else, and unfortunately, when alcohol is introduced into the equation, and I'm not saying that the person was intoxicated, although it's very likely, people go to slurs that make other people feel uncomfortable because they're trying to heckle. It happens in every ballpark, not just Fenway Park, and to kind of make it seem like it's something that only happens in Boston, and it's like, of course, this is what you would expect. I feel that I'm trying to choose my words very carefully here, just because
okay. You did it. What's that?
I just feel like it was a situation that was blown up, and the reason why so many people got offended by it is because somebody actually said last night on Sports Infusion that they thought it was disgusting, and that they were just disgusted by the amount of people calling for proof on Twitter, and that was disrespectful. And my stance on that was,
let me just break in for a second, because I think you said it best when you said it was too much, and I apologize for asking when we only had 2 minutes left for the show.
Yeah, we have 2
so
minutes.
We can, so I just want to break in and say one thing. I agree with you. I don't think it was disrespectful. I think nowadays, when so many things, it's no disrespect to a player. Sometimes even when there's proof, things are subject. I mean, the word is used now often by various different people in various different ways. So I also found Boston to be one of the most, what I felt, accepting cities. Everyone's going to have different experiences, and I agree with you, Pam, that it's not something that you should just see as, I think, people are going to say, you're a former Yankee, someone's going to say, oh, I expected this, I never got it anywhere else. And okay, that's your experience. It shouldn't be a broad brush to paint a city. We're going to close out because it is a difficult topic. If you want to share your thoughts and talk with Pam more about it, you can follow her on Twitter at Sporty Diva. We can continue the conversation on Twitter. We always can. And yeah, somebody just saying something, whatever the accusation is, if there is limited evidence of something that happened, is it wrong to ask for proof? We'll continue the conversation on Twitter. Thanks so much for listening this morning to Bets Like a Girl. If you're going to bet on baseball or any other sport, we wish you the best of luck. And thanks for tuning in.
Take care, everyone.